I'll redo the. Are you posting this on Twitter, Christy?
I can. I didn't post the link on Twitter like for a live webcast, but I've been posting the links on the class repo, and if yeah, it's on YouTube. It goes directly to my YouTube.
Yeah. Just can you just tag me in on post it on Twitter and tag me in?
Sure.
Titus Brown. All right. So hi. I'll do the brief intro. Hello everyone. I'm a professor at UC Davis in the School of Veterinary Medicine, where I moved about a year ago from Michigan State. At Michigan State, I was in microbiology and computer science. Here, I'm in the Department of Population Health and Reproduction. And my primary research interest is in methods for analyzing genomic, metagenomic, and transcriptomic data. So my lab is called the Lab for Data Intensive Biology. I'm less interested in developing new computational methods than I am in helping biologists solve biological problems. And that's why I focus on sort of data-intensive biology rather than on software specifically, rather than on bioinformatics specifically. I can sort of give you a little bit of a background, is that I come from an open source background. Outside of academia, I did some open source development in the Python software community. I feel like my true leanings are in the open source community, and this has sort of bridged very naturally over to the open science community, which is focused on sort of open access, open data, and open source for advancing scientific knowledge, advancing the acquisition of scientific knowledge, I guess I would say. To sort of explain the background of today's discussion, in biology, I think everybody in this class is a biologist, right? Yeah. So in biology, especially in the sort of more omics-oriented fields, but also actually I would say in ecology and evolution, there's been this vast increase in the rate of data acquisition due to sequencing data in particular. And I arrived at Michigan State right at the beginning of this sort of massive increase with the Illumina sequencer, and I've been really focused on this issue of taking these large, rather opaque data sets and getting them to the point where you can extract information from them and use them to inform your biology, your experiments, your hypothesis generation, and all of that. And as part of that, it turns out that as soon as you have lots of data, you basically need a computer to do something with it. And you don't just need a computer, you actually need software. And a lot of our software in science really sucks for a lot of reasons. There are some really good reasons why it's terrible. One is that it's usually only written by and used by a small number of people. Another is that often academics don't have much professional software training. Another is that incentives in academia, these are veering towards the bad reasons, incentives in academia are really aimed at publication and grants and scientific progress per se, rather than writing good software. I would counter that last one by saying that if you write bad software, you're probably not actually advancing research with it, but that gets sort of lost since nobody really reviews software, that sort of gets lost in the shuffle. Just to tie into what we're going to be talking about today, since about 2008 or 2009, we've really been focused on developing a particular type of software. It has to do with k-mers and DNA words, and what the software does isn't particularly interesting for this discussion. But what is relevant is about 3 years ago, we brought a software engineer on board, a guy named Michael Crusoe. And Michael also comes from an open source community-focused background. And he started working on making the project a true community-based project with sort of explicit contribution guidelines and sort of ways, and he ran sprints and hackathons to help people contribute to the software. And as part of all this, at some point he suggests, well, why don't we give everybody who makes any contribution whatsoever to the software, why don't we give them authorship on the software paper that we're going to write with KHMR 2.0? And I said, sure. And I didn't really think about it so much as something other than like, hey, let's try it out. Let's just experiment with it. And again, I haven't really talked too much about what the traditional background is for authorship in publications, but typically in publications, there's some requirement of significant intellectual contribution or significant investment in the project. And a software paper is sort of one step removed from a traditional scientific paper, because what you're doing is you're writing an advertisement for the software. And the software is really the point, but there's really no good way to publish software or get credit for software within the academic ecosystem. There are people working on it, but the easiest venue is still to write a paper about the software and then gain credit that way. And so I thought, well, let's just transfer authorship of the software, as indicated by commits in the version control system, over to authorship on the paper and see what happens. And I like running these kinds of experiments. I thought, let's see what happens. So what happened was that no sooner had we posted the paper on F1000 Research than did a commenter, a full professor at Berkeley, dig through our paper and look at the requirements for authorship and notice that we technically allowed anyone with any Git commit whatsoever on the software to become an author. And we had placed no sort of bar of contribution level. And this professor objected bitterly to this, as you can see on the comments on the paper itself. And so I ended up writing a blog post about it, which is a blog post that I asked you all to read. And I think if you see it, I wrote the blog post. It should be on the screen right now. It's a publication of software papers and authorship on them. And I wrote it, first of all, I made a Princess Bride reference because the Twitter conversation was getting kind of heated, and I would say that people were taking it really, really super seriously. And I didn't think that it was really served the discussion was served very well by, thinking, but by taking it too seriously. I think it's an experiment rather than a something that's intended to destroy the publishing ecosystem as we know it. Although I wouldn't object to destroying the publishing ecosystem as we know it. I just don't have a better alternative yet. Mm-hmm. So the fun thing that happened then is lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people commented on this blog post. So we had 67 comments. And I'll just note in passing that several people have noticed that there's only one self-identified woman in the comments, which is a little bit troubling in terms of participation in the sort of, I would regard, somewhat intellectual discussions online. But apart from that, there were a lot of comments, and they came down really everywhere on the spectrum in terms of what should be done. And we'll go through some of them, but I was really astonished by some of the more senior people and some of the people that commented positively. I should say, I think it's okay for me to say this at this point, I'm really on the fence about whether or not this is the right way to reward contributions to software. I don't know that if we publish another software paper, I would do it this way, because I am invested in the notion that for research papers, significant intellectual contribution is a good bar. Life's too short not to try fun things, so I tried this fun thing. So that serves as some of the background for this discussion. I don't really know what more to say. I think typically the way I do these things is that, I haven't talked about this before specifically, but typically the way I do these things is we just sort of go through the comments and the pluses and minuses, and then I use that as a basis from which to discuss issues that we didn't explicitly bring up in writing in advance. So I think to sort of start the discussion, what I'd like to do is see if I can find this. So I asked everybody in the class to read the blog post and fill out a survey as to what the appropriate requirements for authorship on a survey paper are. And as you can see, 2/3 of the class, so that's 4 out of 6, so statistically significant in biology, said that any significant contribution to the software should be sufficient for authorship on a software paper. A small minority, 1 out of 6, said any contribution at all. and 1 out of 6 said any significant intellectual contribution to the software or research is significant. I think it's really interesting to note that nobody seemed to buy the medical journal perspective that authors have to be significantly involved in the design, analysis, and writing of the paper out of the 6. So I think that's interesting because that's actually what journals point you at when they ask you to assess who should be an author. I'm happy to start in any direction, but I thought it would be sort of fun to do what I call what is called a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Of offering authorship to all contributors to a software project, and this might help illuminate some of the issues. So I'm also happy to just discuss things. What do people want to do?
Sure.
So I didn't hear that.
I think we're gonna go for trying the swap exercise.
Okay. So SWOT is just a way. Typically, I'm graphically challenged. So I just made a list, but typically there's sort of a quadrant approach where you're like, in the upper left goes strengths and then weaknesses and then opportunities and threats, and you sort of write things down. So it's sort of a brainstorming thing. So does anybody have any perspectives on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, or threats of this approach? So just the first thing that comes to mind. Anybody?
Are we thinking in terms of the authors or the product?
I think in terms of the project itself. So, for example, for strengths, characteristics of this approach, offering authorship to all contributors, that give the project an advantage over other projects.
So I have a question here. So here we are discussing the authorship for software paper only, or is for software paper, or for both software paper and research paper? Or do you think, shall we discuss the same policy for both this type of paper, or one for each?
Well, so I think that's right at the heart of the underlying question. So what is the difference? Can you tell me, in your view, what the difference is between?
Yeah, because that's one of my biggest concern when I fill in that form. Because if you are asking me what's the policy for publishing like broad research paper, I might agree with what the medical journal said, like the most strict authorship. But just because I'm thinking about this is in an open science research environment, and we're talking a software paper that everybody might be making some contributions, I go with the third, I think the third one.
Nice.
So yeah, so like it's just my point of view, but I do think the normal, I won't use the word normal, but the broader lab research paper has a lot of difference with computer science and software paper because they are in a more lab-based, more closed environment, and yeah, so I think maybe there is some difference, but I don't know how I should address this.
So let me put. I'm sorry. There's Okay. So let me show you this link. If you look at the comment I just pasted, there's a comment by somebody named Binary Panda on the blog post, and Binary Panda says, you know, a good rule for let's see, there we are. A good rule for research papers is that somebody be able to stand up, all of the authors be able to stand up and give a short talk about what the main findings of the paper were for a research paper. And I think that's sort of the rubric that you're using, right?
Mm-hmm.
that, significant intellectual contribution, you engaged with the research issue, you understood it. You may not have fully understood all of the details of every part of the analysis and data gathering and so on, but at least you can sort of defend and explain the big points of the paper. Is that a fair, sorry, I went on at length. That's a fair summary? Okay.
Yeah, and also, like, something I'm thinking is like, if it's just the normal research paper when not a lot data or programming is involved, usually the contribution goes to first the PI who get funding and initiates the project, and then the student who did the experiment, collected the data, analyzed the data, and then it goes to whoever helped in this process, and then some of the collaborators. So here it comes to the question like, what about those people who make some contributions on doing the experiment, but they don't design the experiment and they didn't make any intellectual innovations? I mean, like for technicians, some technicians, they just do lab maintenance and they just or they just produce experiment materials for everyone in the lab. Or should they have the same authorship as those who design the whole project? And also, like, if the data part is only a small part of this paper, then some people would think, oh, I spent 2 years in playing with the mice and collecting the data and do all this, make all this data list, and you only write a 2-line code and you are sharing the same authorship as me, and they might think it's unfair. I'm just using this very extreme like example for
right.
So yeah, it's
so. Let me ask you a question. What are the downsides of being an author on research?
sorry.
Okay, here, let me mute our microphone while Titus is speaking.
Sorry, yeah. Okay, so what are the downsides of being an author on a research paper? Are there any?
No. Like for each person who are in the author list, I don't think so.
Unless the paper's bad, I mean.
Yeah.
So reputational hits from bad papers?
Yeah, they will take the responsibility for the paper.
Yeah, who said that? I can't. There's a person all the way over there.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah. So actually, if you look up academic misconduct rules, every author on a research paper is responsible for any misconduct. Is technically responsible for any misconduct by any of it published in the paper. That could be a significant downside. Needless to say.
The whole field thing, those other authors that didn't even know that they were on those papers.
Yeah. So you run the risk, right? Like, oh, my co-author fabricated data, and all of a sudden I now have a retraction in my name that was highlighted in Science magazine as this paper got retracted because author A was a schlub, and now my name is tarnished. So there are some downsides and there are some responsibilities associated with research paper authorship. It's not all upsides, I guess I would just say. So let me ask a different question. So should a PI get authorship on a paper? Should a professor get authorship on a paper solely for providing the funding? A research paper?
I
You want to have that conversation with them.
This is going to be an awkward conversation. But
I would say if he is the one that writes the proposal for this project, I would say yes. But if he is just my PI and provide funding for the whole lab, but not specifically propose this project, maybe no.
Okay.
I mean, I suppose it's very, very case by case, and I think typically PIs are included, and I think a lot of the time for students that's because intellectually developing ideas comes from meetings with PIs, and I think that intellectual development of projects is what can grant co-authorship. But I do know in some cases that I have friends that have had PIs that aren't on the papers with them because they supported them with a space but not with help otherwise. And I think that, I think it's way more rare because part of being a student is learning and growing from a person that you ideally choose. But yeah, I think I don't know. I think it's more rare to not have that.
Yeah. I think it's pretty rare, at least in our field,
at this time.
Yeah.
Point.
I mean,
there was somebody that said he got a professor at University of Chicago who basically had one grant going his entire life, his entire active research career, and he never put his name on his students' papers, even when he reviewed the papers significantly, I guess I would say. He provided lots and lots of comments, and he basically said, look, unless I was really intellectually involved, my name didn't belong on the paper, and the student did all the work, and I was just going through and finding mistakes and asking them to update things. So there are people like that. I personally am kind of in the middle, but it's hard to know what to do. So rather than focus on that though, on whether or not a PI should be in the list, I think it's fair to acknowledge right at this point that there are a lot of different rules for authorship in the biological sciences, right? So given that, how do you feel, sort of leading the witness, how do you feel about the use of papers and publications as the primary source of credit in research? I mean, is that problematic at all? Right, so I'm leading the witness, so okay. So one of the things that I never said in the blog post and the discussion is just how arbitrary is just how arbitrary this authorship issue is. So if I just said, so there was a lot of nitpicking made about one person who made one made one commit that fixed a typo in some documentation. I said, how could that possibly be a significant contribution? And if I had just said, in the bottom, if I had just said, look, authorship is awarded based on Git commits and or significant intellectual contribution as judged by the senior author, i.e. Juan, I could have escaped all of this. All I would have had to do is say, yeah, that guy only fixed one typo, but in doing so, he or she went through the entire project, and we had long moonlit walks on the beach at night talking about the project. And trust me, they totally contributed intellectually. What possible response could there have been to that? None, right? You have to trust me because I'm the senior author.
Yeah.
And if you've met a lot of professors, the notion of trust, anyway. So, so I would just say that one of the points that I made right up front in the blog post is that unlike a lot of authorship requirements, this one has the benefit of being explicit, verifiable, and transparent. Right? There's no question who should be an author. You go through the Git logs and you find them and you put them on the paper. And so then there was this other really interesting point that was made just in connection with that, which is that somebody said, where is it? Nobody really has time to go look up who contributed what in a long list of authors. Like that was one of the concerns. But I'm wondering if I thought that was interesting. I was going through preparing for this. There's this really nice little software package called Depsy. I don't know if anybody looked at this link, but there's an issue link submitted by Michael Crusoe. So sorry. Why is Depsy not? Oh, I see. So first of all, let me go point you at let's go take a quick look at what Depsy does. So Depsy basically gives you an overview of who the contributors are to a Python software package. What does Depsy stand for? It's time to value the software that powers science. And so what they do is they introspect the repository and the code and other things, and the authorship lists, and they give you sort of this report on your software. Now, the fun thing, so in theory, that could address this question of nobody really has time to go look up who contributed what in a long list of authors. You go and you look at the Git commit logs, and you say, well, this person changed this many lines of code, or this person showed up this many times, or their average commit was this. And the fun thing about us is we actually just broke that, because on our paper we listed all of the GitHub contributors. DEPC used that to override the weighted impact measurement based on number of commits and number of files modified. So basically, and I should say that the person that filed this GitHub issue is Michael Crusoe, who's the first author on the KHMR paper. So as you can see, Michael is really a troublemaker. And I think it's really sort of a fascinating set of interactions around the fact, DEPC is trying to figure out how to assign credit for software, and it either looks at the authorship on the paper or it looks at the Git repository. And nobody seemed to really they didn't explicitly acknowledge the situation where the Git repository and the paper actually match, because nobody has ever done that except for us, basically, and a few others. That is just sort of an interesting. I don't know. I find these kinds of tensions really interesting. All right. So I don't know. So let's take a quick look. I'm not really being very focused here, but let's take a quick look at some of the comments here. So, let's see. Were there any questions from people? So this was, I really like this comment. I don't know if you can read it. I agree strongly with some of the first comments about getting away from authorship as such a valuable currency in science. It's a weird motivation, and it makes people do weird things. Sometimes I try to explain this to friends and family who aren't academics. Hollywood seems to have a system that works for them. Nobody talks about the author of a movie, but the major contributors are all made obvious, and then we roll the end credits for all the editors, etc. So, my lesson from this, and also from looking at peer review and so on, is that academia has this evolved system that we all pretend to understand, but as soon as you dig below the surface, nobody understands it at all. And different fields have very, very, very different requirements. So, for example, let me see if I can find the link here. I don't have the link. Outside of biology, in physics, particle physics puts everybody on the paper, and so you literally have thousands of authors. So how do you think how in physics would you imagine they assign credit and make careers? Because that's one of the main arguments against doing this in biology, is that there's a few people that are important. Oddly enough, they're usually the professors and the grad students getting PhDs, and those people need to be recognized for career purposes, and everybody else is either a technician or irrelevant and doesn't need a career. And so what we do with the authorship order right now is we make the we have authorship and we have order, and the first author is the person who wrote and really developed the paper, and the senior author is the person that sort of managed the process, and so on and so forth. But this is not how particle physics does it at all. So what do you think? How does particle physics? How would you imagine hypothetically that particle physics advances if they give authorship to everybody? Sorry, I can't tell if that's not a well-formed question. Christy, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm needing to switch the screens. But yeah, I mean, I did my undergrad in physics, and it was a very different environment in general. But yeah, I got to the ranks where these things mattered because I was a lowly undergrad. So, I never really got initiated into that part of the system. I mean, I know that in biology, when we have those large papers, especially in our field where, 10 authors is considered an awful lot, people kind of look at it skeptically and go, did you actually contribute anything? Sure, that's a Nature paper, but did you actually contribute anything to it?
Well, let's go back to what, I'm sorry, I don't know the names of anybody in this class.
Do our quick introduction, my bad. Okay, Baho is here.
Okay.
Angie, Liz, Logan, Assisi, and Sarah.
Okay, Assisi?
Yeah, that works.
Okay, sorry. So we were talking about, you were saying everybody who makes an intellectual contribution should be an author on a paper, and I suggested the able to stand up and give it and defend it as a sort of concrete contributor requirement.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
So that works great if you're interviewing. So suppose you're a physics grad student and you're interviewing for a postdoc or a faculty position, and you're author number 352 of 10,000,
mm-hmm.
and you're interviewing, and you get up and you give a talk. And I think, I don't know how many talks you've all seen, but usually it's pretty clear, for a junior person, usually it's pretty clear whether they have any idea what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Especially if the audience can ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how do you get to that interview, I think, is the real question. Right? So authors number 200, 300, 400, and 500 all apply for the same job. You only get to interview 2 of them. How do you pick those 2? How would you imagine?
Well, naturally, you go with 300 over 400.
Well, I think it just. Oh, sorry. I think it just depends on by interviewing them, by talking to them about the project, you will know who makes what contributions. It's really hard to fake. I think it's really hard to fake something you didn't do, and yeah, I think that's something that, like the interview, the content you are communicating about, is more important than the ranks you are in the author list.
Okay, so let me make the problem more complicated for you.
Okay.
Authors 200 through 500 all apply for the same job. So I have 300 people.
How could the company screen the?
Right. That is so I'm serving on a faculty hiring committee right now,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to interview some subset of the top 10, probably between 3 and 5.
Yeah.
So once you get to the top 10, I mean, we had at a minimum 5 minutes of conversation, if not 10 to 20 minutes of conversation about each of the top 10 people on the list. We dug into their research statement, we dug into their letters of rec, we dug into their papers, we examined their fit for the department. Once you get to the top 10, it becomes a whole different ballgame. But how do you choose those top 10 or top 5 based on a thick application? Any thoughts?
Wow. Yeah, without talking or seeing the person face to face, seems like the paper, the authorship, the project we were in are the only thing we can use to judge somebody. Like, we have to go to some criteria, even if they are not 100% fair or comprehensive. I don't know.
Okay, so let me I'm going to hand wave my way through this. I haven't really prepared this, but I think just to take a step back, this is really at the heart of this issue, right? Who gets jobs, who gets funding, who gets credit? Who gets credit leads to who gets jobs and who gets funding. So how you ascertain credit defines who gets the jobs and who gets the funding. And this is why people are upset or interested in authorship and are upset by our approach. I don't really know how it works in physics, but suppose you had 100 people or 300 people apply for the same job, and all of them, their primary thing, you're looking for particle physicists, they're all on, or you're looking for gravitational wave people, and all of these people are authors on the LIGO gravitational wave paper, and they say, you know, we are all, you know, that is our main project. How do you evaluate between them? So one thing you could do, so I'm going to throw out a bunch of stuff, some of which is fair and some of which is unfair, but, you know, so I'll just start off with one of the ones that's, I think I won't provide any meta commentary. I'll just say, I think, you know, gender or minority status, right? If there are 100 people and 2 of them are women and 1 of them is an African American, given the gender situation and minority situation in academia, probably people are going to take a hard look at those applications to see if they can justify bringing them in for an interview. So it's essentially an affirmative action argument. You know, I think there's lots of moral complexity around that, but that I'm not prepared to address. But that's one thing. Another thing is, who is writing them letters of recommendation?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if suppose that Christy here is Grand High Poobah of the LIGO collaboration.
Don't look about myself.
And she writes letters of rec for 10 of them. And 3 of the letters of rec say this person not only worked their behind off, but made really significant contributions to the detector, the data analysis, the theory. Those would be good reasons to look more closely at those. Whereas if they said this other person, well, you know, they swept the floor real good. You know,
they showed up on time for most meetings.
Yes. Totally off topic. Have you seen the lexicon of intentionally ambiguous recommendations?
Oh no, but I would love to.
So this is full of phrases like, you would be lucky to get them to come work for you.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think that you know, just to sort of try and wrap this up a little bit, I think that there are many ways that many different fields do this. Biology has gotten somewhat addicted to taking the shortcut of journal impact factor, which is a horrible, bad idea, position in the authorship list, which is not a horrible idea if you're an experimentalist, but it's ridiculously unfair to software authors because they almost never make it in the top 3. I have a number of papers where I did almost all of the software and I did not make it in the list of top 3 authors. Yeah, so I guess I would just say, you know, trying to change this culture of how you assign credit and reward people is subject, you know, you need to keep figuring out who to hire, but you also want to reward behavior that's necessary for the field to advance, and that's really the tension that's at the heart of this issue. All right, who buys the concerns around moral hazard? So, do people know what I mean by moral hazard? So there was a comment. There were 2 comments by Nicholas Bray and Istvan Albert on the thing that said on the blog post that said it devalues. Let me just figure out.
Oh, there it is.
Values authorship the biggest currency in science, and it's a moral hazard because you are now encouraging people to make small, inconsequential edits to papers, to software, solely for the purpose of getting authorship that they don't really deserve. And you're literally going to destroy the incentive for writing papers because writing good papers, because people will just realize they can write software papers all day long and get all the authorship they want on them and then make their career that way. I may have presented that in a biased way.
Like, if you want to be paranoid forever, I guess you could think like that. But I don't think any of our goal is to, you know, cheat our way through. I mean, maybe some people's goal is that, but I think for, you know, most of us, we want to do what we're doing because we like it and we think it's important.
You know, if I had a throwaway life, I think it would be very entertaining to just try that once.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's a way to build a fulfilling life.
No, and I think,
Yeah,
I think
it's more of a
sustainable in terms of like.
Okay, so there are three types of people in this world for the purpose of this 1 minute statement. One type are the wonderfully awesome people like you and Christy that want to lead a fulfilling life and make progress in science. Mm-hmm. Another kind is people that simply want to advance. And by advance, get papers, get funding, and make a career out of it. I would like to point out that my personal, I switch between those two for a couple of reasons. One of which is that I have a wife and kids, and without healthcare, life would be, that's an issue, right? So everybody has a career component, right? How many of you would do graduate school if you weren't getting paid a subsistence wage? Right? Well, and how'd you get into grad school? Well, you got good grades. How'd you get good grades? Sometimes by doing really stupid courses that weren't really that relevant and doing well at them. There's an element of gamesmanship to really all of this stuff. Then there's the third type of people, and these are the really troubling and annoying people, and they're super fun and super annoying. And these are what I would call the trolls. And these are people who will manipulate and poke the system just to see if they can make it break. They push buttons until something blows up. And you have to design for all three. Designing for the first is pretty easy. Designing for the people that just want to make progress is actually pretty easy because you just try and get out of their way. Designing for the people that want to have a career is much harder because you have to take into account gamesmanship. You have to take into account people who will see a metric and go for that metric. Because that's the metric by which they get, say, tenure or a job. So let me show you. Let me see if I can find this. Wikipedia metric. I think it's Wikipedia any metric devalues. There's some. Okay, well, I'll have to find the link. But there's a phrase that says metric becomes target. As soon as a measure becomes, basically as soon as a measure becomes a target for some reason, it ceases to become a good measure, basically, right? And you can see this. If someone says, the way you're going to advance is we're going to give you, we're going to count the number of publications. Yeah. Lots of publications happen. The way to advance is to get something into science. People manipulate statistics until they get a paper into science.
Right.
And you have to design systems that are robust to that as well. And then you also have to design systems that are robust to people who just like to break things, or people who like to break things in bad ways, so harassment and cheating. So just something to think about. So one point I wanted to make here is that I don't know that anybody actually believes the argument that there's a moral hazard here. So, sorry, I'm trying to find the comment. So, where was Tal Yarkoni? He says, sorry, I can't find it. He said something about there's going to be a flood of new contributors. Sorry, I can't find it anymore. But basically, this guy Tal Yarkoni, who I know reasonably well, said, "Oh my gosh, you're going to get a flood of new contributors on the paper because now everybody on the project because now everybody knows that if you correct a typo, you're going to get authorship." The paper's been out now for over 3 months, We haven't gotten a single new contributor on the KHMOR project. So
Do you have a list of issues that we could all jump in on?
we do. And that's actually, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just joking.
Well, so let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at that question. So, is it that simple to get something into KHMOR? So, let's go to getting started with KHMOR development. So, actually, let me show you the checklist. So, I don't know, have you gone through GitHub much, Christy?
The class, we're doing pretty much all of our work on GitHub. So.
Okay, so here, when you want to merge something into GitHub, into our GitHub repository, here are the rules. You need to create a pull request on GitHub that's mergeable, that passes our automated tests, which cover about 90% of the code base. If you introduce any new functionality, you need to make sure it's tested. You need to make sure the formatting's right. You need to make sure you didn't change the command line interface, because then we update the versions. You should actually add something into the change log. You need to make sure you're running spell checkers. And then you need to update the copyright, and there's some other technical requirements. And so when you look at what you actually need to do in order, it's not as simple as going and editing a file and hitting a single button. There's actually a fair amount of effort and labor that goes into making sure that what you're doing doesn't break the software. And that includes documentation, because our documentation is automatically built. And if you've looked at restructured text or Markdown, it's not actually necessarily that trivial to make syntactically correct Markdown or restructured text. I'm not saying it's hard, but it's not, you know, it's in there. So something else to think about is, what is a significant contribution? I actually am pretty happy defending the argument that if you can figure out how to jump through all of the hoops for contributing to our project, that's a significant contribution. I'm going to go with that being a reasonably significant contribution. Intellectual, maybe not. Technical, yes. So, I don't know.
Yeah, so you've built a check into it. So.
Yep. So,
yeah, if someone forks our class data analysis repo and completely restructures our things, and what do you think, guys? Yeah, I mean, it's all publicly available, and so, I mean, I haven't made contributorship guidelines because I just haven't gotten off my butt to do that. But
But the good thing is we can always go back to
yeah,
the point that it's.
well, what if someone comes up with something really good that we didn't think of?
Join us.
Yeah, they should probably join us.
Yeah.
We should probably give them authorship on it.
hang on a sec. Add good hearts. So let me show you one or two other things in the last couple minutes. The one last thing I want to say. So there's actually a really big drawback of the way we did authorship, which is that it overemphasizes the software development of our primary package while ignoring the dependencies. So what do I mean by that? So our software package depends on several other software packages, one of which we actually use quite extensively. And those people aren't authors on this paper. And in fact, if you look at the dependencies for our software package, we depend entirely on Python, for example. There's a large community of people that are maintaining the Python software ecosystem. And we don't put any of them on as authors, despite the fact that we rely completely and utterly on Python and Linux, basically. Well, not Linux necessarily, but the POSIX operating system interface for everything our package does. By only including people that contributed to our particular GitHub repo, we ignore all of the people that contributed to all of the repos that we depend upon. So if I write a single piece of scientific software that's used by 1,000 other projects, and I'm the only one writing that piece of scientific software, I have no direct way of arguing currently that I contributed to those 1,000 projects that are using my project, if that makes sense. That seems kind of unfair.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about that in terms of like our field, and that's when citing work comes in for me. And yeah, I couldn't do my research if somebody didn't first figure out that this thing ate this other thing, but I'm not going to make them an author for figuring that out 50 years ago. So the citation thing, counts for that.
But what about in citations? You often go back and cite the original literature. So if somebody reads your paper and says, "Oh, person X, Y, and Z 50 years ago found out that giraffes eat zebras, and that's really super important for this ecological statement," they will go cite the paper that said that giraffes eat zebras.
Yeah.
In this case, though, if I write a single piece of software that's cited by once by 1,000 other packages, or sorry, that's cited once by 10 packages, and one of those packages is cited 1,000 times, I still only get 10 citations. Because we also, and then that's ignoring the part where most software packages simply aren't cited by by people who use them. So KHMR itself has officially like 50 to 100 citations total, maybe 150. And a friend and colleague actually found, by searching the literature, that he could identify another 100 to 150 that had been miscited. They cited our documentation URL rather than our software package, or they cited, this is one of my favorites, they cited a website on their own, on another university that had posted our documentation in their local HPC help wiki. And they cited that wiki page.
Wow.
Yeah, so anyway, I don't know. I have a tough time coming to any conclusions on this. But I hope that you're all as confused as I am.
Well, it seems that, academia has more of an emphasis on the authorship structure, but also a better mechanism of citing contributions, like a traditional academic publication. But then when you put software in the mix, and with the total lack of citation structure really enforced, it's just like this, well, it's the Wild West of actually assigning credit.
Yep. Cool. I think it's your class is over.
You guys are the Wild West, and we're doing basic software development and stuff like that. So
Can I have one more question? So, so you mentioned about the DAXI system that you can see the contributions of all different authors, and they rank pretty well who does what and how important they are. But so using like who changed the repo is a standard that is very transparent and very verifiable to determine the authorship. But how can we transplant this criteria, this system, or this advantage to some closed research, like the regular type of lab research? How can we use something similar like this to determine the authorship that don't have a repo, don't use GitHub? Nobody save their notes online, and everything is just in their own notebook, and maybe only your labmate knows, only your PI knows. There's no online record for this. Like, how can we transplant this experience?
So I would say that it's much worse than even you just said now. This is a standard theme with me. Like, oh yeah, that's a horrible situation, but you're actually ignoring a much larger horrible situation. Most contributions to research are not digitally captured or capturable. They cannot be digitally captured. And so this is where the culture comes in. This is where the lab culture comes in, where the people in the lab have to decide who is rewarded in what way.
Yeah.
And I think that, if I am a professor and all I do is I make ink marks on paper printouts that my student brings me of their papers, that can still be a really significant intellectual contribution, especially if I'm shaping the points that are made, if I'm framing things in a broader way, if I'm contributing to the theoretical development of the framework. Those aren't going to be digitally captured. because I might not be the person editing the Google Doc or the Word file or the GitHub repo, but I would argue that they're pretty important. So I think it's probably a bad idea to rely too much on the notion that what we're going to do is track everything digitally, because we already know that that's not a good standard. And instead, what we should do, and this is really my main point of disagreement with myself on this authorship situation with KHMR, is that by necessity the standards are wishy-washy, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So, you know, we should focus on use cases and laying out situations where people should get authorship, and then get on with our lives. I don't have a more optimistic statement than that, but yeah, I don't know. Not a very hopeful prospect, but there you go.
Well, creating a culture where more people are willing to talk about these things might actually make, you know, better standards and make it so that not each lab is its own island of standards. And so that I think is sort of our best, not great but best solution.
Yeah, and when it comes to like the different standards, like authorship or numbers of papers, the impact factors of papers, maybe it's not a bad thing by doing this to devaluate some system. Because as Titus mentioned, if a system is overvalued, it becomes a tool for people who use it to advance instead of making scientific contributions. So devaluate some overvalued system might be a good way of making the judging environment more diverse, and more comprehensive.
So, but you're all ecologists, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
This is an arms race. You cannot win arms races except by racing.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind. So this is Goodhart's law, which Greg Wilson reminded me is the name of the law, that says when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So, and I will tell you, I am actually optimistic. You can discount this because I'm now a tenured professor, so obviously, like, I have no more cares in the world, right? I've made it. You know, I didn't have many publications. I didn't have much in the way of, my grants were okay, but I did have a good reputation, and that was what led towards me getting tenure. Basically, what happened is they found a bunch of people who could write letters of recommendation saying, Titus isn't a total schlub, you should probably give him tenure. And I actually, you know, this is very self-interested, but I would say that's a decent measure. If you can find well-respected people in the field to say that person X, Y, or Z is worth hiring or is not a schlub, then the next question is, are they a fit for your department and for what you want? And are they any good? So I don't know. There are, I guess I'd say there are many worse metrics, and I'm not sure if there are better objective ones that I can point to. But again, white guy with tenure. Obviously the system works.
You white guys with tenure.
Obviously the system works.
Well, we're now over time, so I guess that's as good a place to close as any.
Thanks, Christy. Hope that was interesting, everybody.
Titus, this has been fun.
Great. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.